All right. Well, Keith, I'm so excited to talk with you. You have such an incredible, interesting story, and figuring out where to start is just it's it's um it's awesome. Everything that you've done. Your journey is taking you from the crisp air of Alaska to the halls of the Pentagon, deserts of Iraq. Please, share maybe a pivotal moment from your travels that reshaped your perspective on life.
Well, Morissa, first, thanks for having me as a part of your show. Um, every place you go, there's a pivotal moment, whether it be in a new assignment with the military, whether it be a new job in the corporate world. There's always great people out there who influence you. But I would have to say, given all my travels, and many of them were not optional. The military does have what's called orders, right? So you have to follow those. But it'd probably be in the Pentagon during 911, and I would say that's a pivotal moment because you're in this protected environment. So you think you're in an office building. Granted, there are thousands of people, but you kind of are brought up in the world that the good guys on this side and the bad guys on this side, and there's a line across, kind of the World War II mentality that we had, or even the Desert Storm mentality, that you're protected in your own cities. So when you see an attack of a terrorist that can reach where you were sitting, working in an office environment, that lets you know that you could be a target, you're vulnerable, you're accessible. And that changed my whole outlook on tactics. It changed my whole outlook on life. I think it let the world know just how short life can be when we lost 185 people in the Pentagon and thousands more in the World Trade Center, people just doing their job in what we thought was protected areas. So that really turned me on to saying, look, something's got to be done. And it allowed me to really make the decision at that point. I wasn't going to retire. I was going to stay in, I think, another 5 years. I stayed in 5 busy years. And it let me know that life is short. That's a time you go home and you hug your kids and you hug your family and you call your relatives, you speak to the brother-in-law you haven't talked to in a while, and make up. And truthfully, we should be doing that all along, but those moments really, I think, center to how important life really is. And that was the one pivotal moment that made me just understand that I was not invincible. None of us are. And it opened my eyes.
Wow. Yeah, that's and it touching that. Oh my God. I don't even um yeah, and your whole story, I mean, it's just you walk the Camino Francis, which is no small feat. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But what did those it was 500 miles. What did that teach you about endurance, both physically and mentally?
The Camino France is probably one of the best things I've ever done. If you ever want to recenter yourself, jump on a trail and just start walking, you go through a lot of different thoughts, and there are periods of times you don't see people for hours, and sometimes you're walking through, hundreds of people. But it really allows you to go back to yourself, which I think a lot of people have to do, and I certainly did, and that's why I did it. But if I could just tell you, it was probably the most spiritual thing I've ever done in my life. Taken 40 days off and jumping on a trail in France and walking across Spain. But it really taught me, Morissa, about pain, people, and stuff. Okay. So when you take a look at those three words, pain, people, and stuff, the first part of the hike, you're hiking over 4,000 feet over the Pyrenees. It's 19 miles, but it seems like 90. And it's the first day. So really, no one's in shape. And of course, you're carrying ruck that's too heavy. So you're hurting. And that hurt carries you through, I would say, the first third of the entire walk. Every day, I woke up with pain in my Achilles tendons, my knees, my back, whatever it might be. And the only way that pain went away is when it moved from my knees to my Achilles or my Achilles to my thighs. It never left my body the whole time. It kind of moved throughout. It let me know a lot about myself. And you had to walk through that pain, very much like our first responders do every day, like our soldiers do every day. Everybody does it, but it taught me about pain. And then along the way, you're meeting people from all these different countries and you're walking with them. And you try not to say, what do you do? You try to say, who are you? You try to keep it more spiritual, in effect, right? You try to talk about, their family, where they're from, what they like to do. But you always wind up with, what they've done. And you meet people like CEOs who just, retired or sold their company, and they're on the trail to figure out what their next part of their journey is. You meet people who are college students, you meet people from all over. So the people part is you really put yourself in this whole sea of different people, and you realize in the end of the day, you're all kind of the same. Okay. And then the stuff aspect, I think the thing that struck me the most is I met this young lady who was from the Netherlands on the trail. And she had a rucksack, backpack, whatever you call it, that was 3 times my size. Okay. I mean, really, it was part in the front, it was in the back, it was one of these to have the sleeping bag up here. And I got to talking with her because she was still walking faster than I was, okay, with all that weight. And to make a long story short, she was about 27 years old. She sold everything she had back in the Netherlands, her car, her condo, put the money in the bank. And she looked at me and said, everything I own is on my back. And I thought about that and I said, how refreshing. And I realized that when I got home, I had to get rid of a lot of stuff I didn't need. We spend the first many years of our life, Morissa, accumulating so much. And then I think we hit a point halfway where we realize that our legacy is not to accumulate, our legacy is a give. What do we want to be remembered by? And it's not what we had, it's what we give. So anyway, that's what I will tell you about the journey. That's what I'll tell you about, what it did physically and mentally for me. Truthfully, I still kind of hurt. It still has a few pains in my knees and Achilles tendons, but I'll look in the eye and tell you, I can't wait to go again. It was the most promising, great thing I've done in many years.
That's amazing. Everything you say is just so inspiring. What's really inspiring about your story also is the transitions that you made. Like you transitioned from military life to boardroom. That's, like switching combat boots to loafers. So what skills from your Army days do you find most valuable in corporate strategy?
This will be a much shorter answer, I'll tell you. It's a little bit harder than changing from boots to Oxford shoes. And I know what you mean by that question, but the real skill is one of humility. And it's one of just admitting that, you don't know. It's one of saying you don't know. You find that the military is very good at training you to be able to be certain things, but it's also very good at asking you and making sure you know to say you don't know because there's someone else who does. And you stop learning really quick in the military about credit. You quit worrying about credit and start worrying about getting things done. And that skill is not always seen in the boardroom. So I think that transition, bringing it from the military to the boardroom and to the corporate world, makes the corporate world better because humility is something I think that everyone needs, whether you're in the military or not. The next thing I would say, you realize in the military, our job was always to find someone smarter than us when we worked with them. I wanted my staff to be smarter than I did. I really did. They had certain areas, but I treasured the leader that would, look at what I did and say, well, there's a better way. I want 10 of those. I think sometimes in the corporate world, we want to be the smartest person in the room, and really we're not. And there are a lot of Generation Zs, Ys, Xs, whatever they are right now coming up who are brilliant. We need to listen to. So I think those two things, humility and looking at being the smartest person in the room, taking that out of the spectrum and hiring people smarter than you are, and probably talking 10% of the time. Leaders tend to get in rooms and they want to chat all the time. Trust me, everyone around the room has something to say. Let's talk 10% of the time and listen 90% of the time. So that's probably the biggest thing I think I brought from the military to the boardroom.
I love that. A lot of wisdom there. And it reminds me of, in your book, Taking the Mask Off, you mentioned Dr. Seuss, the Bible, quite the literary spectrum. So maybe you want to expand on, kind of the implications of what these vastly different sources, how they influence your writing, and yeah, a bit about your book.
I think I wrote the book a little backwards than most. I didn't put the title first. I wrote the book and then thought of the title later, okay? Because I had to put this collection of these myriad of topics that I had throughout the book, 65 short stories, into a place that I think could be understood. So everything related to taking the mask off, whether it's a mask of conformity, sadness, happiness, whatever it might be. So that was something that was standard. But you're right. The foundation of the Dr. Seuss to the Bible, people kind of say, well, what does that mean? Well, if you look at Dr. Seuss, and I read Dr. Seuss, I watched the cartoons as a little boy, there's a lot of knowledge and wisdom in Dr. Seuss, be who you are, say what you feel, because those who mind don't matter and those who matter don't mind, all the way up to, talks about my childhood growing up at the cabin, a very special place, and then following Christianity, the Bible, and what's laid out there. And I think that the reason I put from Dr. Seuss to the Bible is that was always a road that I learned on, whether it be the cartoons of Dr. Seuss and being who I am. My parents taught me that. Well, my parents taught me to, express myself. Morissa, it's when I veered from that road that connected Dr. Seuss to the Bible that I got in trouble. So what the purpose of the title really is to say that's the road I knew I needed to travel. It's not the road that's in the book that I traveled all the time, because the book talks about more missteps than steps. But what happens with those missteps is I also talk about how I got back on the road and how the reader can stay on the road and what the reader can learn. So that's why the title of Dr. Seuss, being very simple, watching cartoons, Heckle and Jekyll, Bugs Bunny, Dr. Seuss. Parents teach you the right way to do things. You know the right way. I had two great parents from the greatest generation who are in heaven now. And then I talk about the military and I talk about the Bible, all very well laid out. When did I get in trouble? When did I go off course? When I veered off that road.
That's now, so you have seen the world from so many angles, author, like we just discussed, soldier, executive.
Yeah.
So all these unique vantage points, how they influence, I know you mentor startups and small businesses in the aerospace industry. How do these vantage points influence that, since you have such varied experiences?
I think my unique opportunity working with corporations, and it's shown, and my experience is the fact that I start at the bottom every time. Whether I was in the military and I was going to the academy and I started out as a lieutenant, corporate world, I started out as a manager. I've always been starting out at the bottom of all different endeavors. So when I approach a business and a business approaches me and they're a startup and small, which is all I focus on, startups and smalls, I don't have to say, I know somebody who knew somebody. Let me see if I can find somebody. I can say I've been there. I can say that's where I started. I can say I've been in your shoes. Now, I may not know what you're feeling, but there's very little that they can talk about that I haven't experienced. And by the way, some things I did right, something I did wrong. So I think the credibility aspect of being at the bottom, at the beginning, and the bottom's not a bad place to start by any means. You get that whole realm of experience. And a lot of companies do this very well, where they, no matter if you're going to be the vice president one day, you start off washing cars, you start off in the mailroom. And that gives everybody a perspective. The military does it very well too, as you can imagine. You start off at lower units and work your way up. So I think what I offer is the angle of I've been there. And oh, by the way, this is my first book as an author. Where am I starting? At the bottom, right? So that's what I offer.
That's great. And also along those lines, since you have worn many masks throughout your career, are there any that are maybe more challenging to navigate in the business world than others?
I think the mask of conformity is one that's really been hard for me. And I'll say it was my fault for putting that mask on. I mean, I don't blame anybody for that at all. It's me. I think, the first thing you have to do is take responsibility of your actions. And let me be clear, I'm taking responsibility for my actions. But as we've talked about several times already in the business world hires you for what you can do for them. Effort gets you a seat at the table. It doesn't guarantee you anything. And you have to understand that when you get in the business world that's there. And that's probably been the most challenging to navigate. There's a saying that, culture eats strategy for lunch every day. And it's very true. So I think that one of the things in the business world that's been very hard for me and very challenging is trying to be someone that I really wasn't, and not understanding that I was hired based upon what I offered and I was different. And then as I got in that world, I slowly transitioned to what everyone else was doing. And ironically, some of the challenges I've had in the business world have been other leaders saying, we do it this way. You don't quite fit in the way we do it. And my response has been, but you hired me because I was different. Why you give me this feedback? Because I am. So it's been a kind of juxtaposition of beliefs, but I would tell anybody going in, be who you are, let them know who you are, and make that change, because that's really why they hired you. I've read some great books from colleagues who talk about that transition. One is from CEO to CEO by Bill Tody, a great friend, and he lays it out flat for everybody. And it really I wish the book was out there when I made that transition. It's just a phenomenal book.
That's awesome. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're very much a leader, and I wonder, if you have any stories, maybe from your military service that define your leadership style. What that would be?
Uh, yeah, I think from the military service, I'll probably combine some things here. My leadership style is one of decentralization. I believe in hiring people who can do the right things. I believe in constant training, and I believe that we should have an environment in our organization, whether it be in the military or the civilian structure, that if the leader is absent, everything runs well. So I believe in training my leaders, hate to say it, to do my job. Because in the military, you have to do that if you happen to meet your fate, or in the civilian world, if you want to take a vacation, you don't want to be tied to your phone. So I've always thought, and I've always judged my subordinates in both the military and the business world, that when they take a vacation, when they go to a conference, if the organization runs smoothly, I give them a thumbs up. If everything falls apart and they have to be there, then they really haven't done their job. Part of our role, part of my leadership style is making sure the organization is successful. I can only do that if we have cross training, if we have people who have confidence, and if we're giving people an opportunity. We need to say thank you. We need to say I'm sorry. We need to say, hey, no, instead of going, how you doing, which is kind of a common, three-letter phrase that doesn't mean much. It ought to be, what can I do today to help you? What haven't I done before that I can do better at? And I also think the 360-degree survey is phenomenal that businesses are starting to put out right now, where subordinates have an opportunity to judge their leaders and talk about who's really, hitting the mark.
That's great. And I know that you have a company, One Core Consultants, and it seems like a lot of what you're talking about. You probably have a core philosophy that you impart on these budding entrepreneurs from everything that you've already talked about.
Yeah, I impart the philosophy that's in a website and One Core Consulting that my vision is to create, and I try to exercise this, fearless creativity by unlocking opportunities. Now, that's kind of a straightforward sentence, but I had a customer yesterday, 8 o'clock in the morning. He and I were chatting about a particular website that he's working. And he's doing some great work on this website. And he's got the right target audience, got the right location. And I asked him a question. I said, well, how are you getting recurring flywheel revenue from this website? You're putting it out there. You're giving everybody everything, right? I mean, they sign up, they get X, Y, Z. They don't need you anymore. So we talked about the connection. And I think what I do and what I offer, that fearless creativity, is I said, if you'd expand your circles a little bit more and your audience a little bit more, you could attract the same audience that the federal government is trying to help do that same skill. And then you could find a way to work with the government. And then you could find a way to get government grants, government support, along with commercial support. Then you could tie into businesses. So that's a type of thing, I think, unlocking in that entrepreneur's mind who's so focused, and boy, they know their subject well. But if you just expand it a little bit, doing the same type of things that they're doing now, no more buying for material, not even adding people, but just expand that market space, expand that thought, a few more connections, and it just can multiply their opportunities. And that's why I say, unlock that, unforeseen opportunities and create that fearless connectivity that they can do.
That's great. How about if you have, I've said it before, but you have so much wisdom, so many leadership skills. If you could send back any message in time to your younger self, just starting out in Alaska, what would it be?
Well, first, if I had to do it again, I'd probably be a bush pilot. I love to fly planes, and it was my dad that told me to go to school, or else I'd be landing on Mount Denali these days, taking mountain climbers up. That's just been my passion. But he changed that at a young age. But if I could give advice to the young Keith, to young people all over the world, make sure your ladder is leaning against the right wall, okay? And if you don't know what you want to do, that's okay. take some time off and figure it out. You don't have to have everything planned out for the next 40 years, but make sure that what you're doing is your passion and what you want to do. Make time for your family and understand that sometimes scaffolding, going laterally, is better than trying to go up. And you find that sometimes when you go up pretty fast, and I made that mistake, there's no one following you. And you have to be careful about that. So that's probably the advice I give to a young person these days. You know, they have tremendous more knowledge than I do. They have a lot more assets than I do. Social media is out there. My hat's off to them. My hat's off to the parents that have raised this great generation. But don't forget your family and don't forget yourself. And also start off with, you know, before you can fall in love with someone else, make sure you find time to love yourself, because, you know, you are a good person.
That is so beautiful. I love it. I was gonna ask, is there anything else you want to add? That was like the perfect note to leave it on, but is there anything else you want to add or share, or where can people follow you? You know, I'll leave links to your book and your company and all that, but what imparting words do you want to leave?
I would say you learn every day, and keep in mind the journey is your reward, not necessarily your destination. I've written the book many times, you know, how fast do you have to go to really get there? And if you just think of that, right? We spend time on the road, and the first thing we want to do is go somewhere, and that's all we think about. But sometimes you need to stop and pull over and look at the overpass, or look at the road, or look at the scenery, or enjoy the scenery. When I walked the Camino for 32 days and that 500 miles, you know, I stopped numerous times, not necessarily to take pictures, but just take it in. And I would encourage people, you know, as the lesson here is, remember, the journey you're on, whatever it is, the journey is a reward, whether it's raising your family, whether it's going to work with great coworkers and doing things. Don't forget the journey. Quit worrying about the destination so much. It'll come. You know, don't look at retirement. Look at the way up there to retirement. Then find something to do that's meaningful. The journey is a reward, and also find a way to give back to your community. What's going to be your legacy? Those two things.
That's beautiful. I love it. You're an absolute inspiration. Thank you so much for taking the time, you know, to talk here. And yeah, I'm excited to check out your book.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.